Yes, let's welcome Zarir Bharucha and Niloufer Lam to the session from the partners of Zarir Bharucha and the law firm, and we will be talking about a very interesting topic: how to build a specialist law firm today. And I see that people are still joining into the session. Uh, that's great. Just let's give this a moment for more people. Zarir, we can see you, but where is Niloufer? Is she also on the same
I think
frame?
she's trying to log on. Can you give me 5 minutes? Just give us. I think she's having some IT issues.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So we
Yeah,
can start the conversation with you, perhaps, and
sure.
then
Go ahead.
wait for her to join.
Yeah.
Great. So of course, like why don't we start from tell us a little bit about ZBA as a law firm? And I believe this is a practice and law firm that you started a long time back. When you started, was it with the idea that you want to start a law firm, or was it to start an independent practice or something else?
So the genesis of ZBA is a little different from most other firms. I trained and qualified with Linklaters in London, and I came back to India around the end of 96, early 97.
Mm-hmm.
And I initially started counsel practice, and I don't know, maybe over a period of time, it just naturally happened. I started specializing and doing a lot of offshore work for offshore clients. And as a result of that, a lot of the work was coming directly. Clients would come directly to me. And that had been the case for at least 15 years, if not more. And in a sense, I was, for all intents and purposes, practicing as a firm, but with restricted capabilities limited to contentious work, litigation, predominantly commercial litigation, with a cross-border emphasis either on arbitration or dispute resolution in India. Most of that work also tended to be largely commercial disputes. And then Niloufer came on board in 2017, and that's when we started expanding the areas of expertise or areas of focus. So she was specialist in debt capital markets and financing and corporate work. And then, of course, in 2017, you had the seismic shift in terms of the IBC and the insolvency work that it threw up. And the insolvency work is very exciting because it opens up new vistas for lawyering, both on contentious and non-contentious work. So the transactional lawyers like Niloufer are very busy in terms of advising clients about whether they should be submitting bids. In fact, a lot of the M&A activity in India moved across to the insolvency space. And similarly, there was a lot of contentious work that insolvency threw up, which essentially is, and some areas of it were novel, clearly, because we were starting with a clean slate in India. Some of it was based on historical principles of company law, etc. And that was an area that we felt it, certainly from my practice area, a logical extension. So we are trying to sort of build out the insolvency side of the practice, both in terms of contentious and non-contentious work. And Niloufer is doing the transactional side. So she's been very focused and busy on the financing side of things. There's going to be a lot of, in fact, with COVID and the disruption that the prolonged lockdown has caused, we anticipate a flood of work on financing, or rather refinancing, a lot of restructuring work on the transactional side. And I would also expect a fair amount of disputes as a result of that. People trying to invoke force majeure or trying in some shape or form to be excused for their obligations. So these are all areas which are part of our core competency. I see a lot of disputes on the international trade side. Clearly, if you're Indian importer of, say, steel, as you've seen with the recent Bombay High Court judgment, where you had a bunch of steel importers buying from South Korea who tried to get an injunction restraining payment out of their bank guarantees from the Bombay High Court on the ground that they, due to COVID, they could no longer perform their obligations. And I'm happy to say that the Bombay High Court took a robust view and said, nothing doing, you have to abide by your obligations, you have to perform. So I'm just using that as one small example of how we are likely to see new forms of work emerge from this situation that we are currently in.
Okay.
I'd like Niloufer to pitch in, but
is she yet on the go?
I think she's having some IT-related problems. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
Let me try and.
Yeah, I think Niloufer is logging in from her iPhone.
She's logging in from the iPhone now?
I believe so. I think we can just try. Niloufer, if you can hear us, can you speak?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Apologies for being a bit late. I was having some trouble with my laptop, and then I was on mute.
No problem,
Great.
No problem.
So, I think
glad you can you could join us. We are just talking about the origin story of ZBA as a law firm and how it got started and how Zarir got started. And if you can also tell the story from your perspective, how did you get started and what was the initial idea that you were pursuing?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having us on. It's a pleasure. I think, from my perspective, just by way of background, I'd worked abroad for a long time, mainly in the UK. I used to be at an international firm, Linklaters, and moved back to India in 2010. And, I'd worked with Amarchand for about 7 years. And I just felt, part of the reason for me to do this is I like the idea of being able to create something, of creating a firm, of developing it, of having a role that was broader than perhaps just merely the advisory side of providing legal advice to clients. Of course, that's always our core competence, and that's what we love. But for me, I think the challenge and the satisfaction comes from, trying to build something. And along the way, there have been many successes, many failures. One learns along the way, but it's fun, and it's a new challenge. And I think in that sense, India is a great country for that. Because people are entrepreneurial,
right.
People are creative. From a lawyer.
And there are many problems to solve.
There are many problems to solve. There are many success stories. Laws are always changing because we are a developing economy, because we have issues of scale, volume, language, whatever it might be. So all of that yields opportunity. And I think, where the legal industry is today, I think, there are many other people like ourselves who've done this, and they've done it successfully. And I think that it shows that the legal industry today in India is an industry that accommodates different types of law firms. So you may have specialist law firms in terms of product area. You may have it in terms of sector experience. You may have big law firms. You have boutique law firms. You have multidisciplinary law firms. One of the things that we want to do is be a bit more multidisciplinary in the way that we approach lawyering. And I think that that's something that we try to at least think and try to emphasize both internally and externally, because today in the fast moving world, you can't just be a lawyer. You need to understand the policy. You need to understand partly the economics of what's going on, even to a little degree, to get some context. Because I feel at least that lawyering today is all about the judgment that you give a client, right? It is not black and white. It is always areas of gray, whether because of the way the regulations or the laws are, or because of the facts of the case, or because of different views being taken, whatever it might be. And of course, that's what keeps it interesting. I think
in a way, you are suggesting that lawyers are working like oracles for their clients,
like what? Sorry,
oracles. Yeah. No, Ramanuj, just to add to that, I think what is very valuable today for clients, and I think this applies today to our generation and also to yours, the next generation of lawyers coming through the ranks, is that clients are looking for value addition and they want domain expertise. So, you still find generalists, but I think increasingly clients want sophisticated, in-depth advice and analysis, which you're only in a position to give if you're a sector specialist. If you do not understand the commercials behind what your client is asking or inquiring about, it becomes very difficult to advise in a comprehensive way, in a commercial way. You'd give abstract advice, but it wouldn't sort of hang on to the commercials that the commercial objective that the client is trying to achieve.
Right. So, I was going through, when I was preparing for this interview, I was going through, what various publications has written about ZBA and in your profiles on LinkedIn and other, whatever is available in the public domain. And while reading, the two questions came to my mind, is that what is it that you specialize in? Because you are doing large transactions, you're working in the banking industry, there was some shipping related work. So when I see so many sectors, this is something that I wanted to ask you, that what is your USP and what is your specialization when you say you're building a specialist firm, because there are so many different industries that you have been catering to. So there must be some other specialization perhaps. So what is it that you specialize?
Yeah. So I think obviously, I think that's the 3 or 4 practice areas that are key for us, given our experience over the last 20 plus years, are litigation and arbitration, which is more of a practice area than an industry area, shipping and maritime, obviously for Zarir, debt capital markets and banking for myself, and insolvency. Now, there are adjuncts to that in terms of, M&A, I would say in general corporate commercial, and everything we do partly is general corporate commercial anyway, to be honest. But I'd say those are our key practice areas, and that's where we intend to continue to focus.
Okay.
And as we grow the firm, I think these are the lines upon which we will kind of continue to grow them. Obviously, our idea is to grow the firm, but we want to grow it in a much more, what we would expect to see in an international law firm. So very democratic, a full partnership vote, very open door policy, very flexible ways of working for people as far as we can do it. The transition to COVID for us was, and working from home rather, was quite seamless, because anyway, we used to work on a virtual kind of desktop, which we implemented about a year and a half ago. So I think things like that, we really, from our perspective, we don't really mind where people work from as long as, it gets done. And
right. So I will come to that bit on the sorry for the interjecting. I will come to that international law firm in a bit. Just wanted to understand from your perspective, because when I think of a full service big law firm, they have their dispute practice and M&A and banking and capital markets. So you more or less cover all of the areas in a way. So
I think we don't cover tax, we don't cover IP, we don't cover employment,
competition.
We don't cover really competition. We don't do equity capital markets. We only do debt. And, we've had people approach us for that kind of work. And, we're very clear about it. We will tell clients that, look, we don't really do that kind of work. So if you want us to do it, we'll do it. But, we're telling you now that we're not experts in this. And generally, clients actually appreciate it. They appreciate honesty.
Right. So how do you want to, the way I see, from here, what is the next big step? So 2 things I want to understand now. One is that, what have been some of the really big highlights in your journey in the last few years, and where do you want to see the firm in a few years down the line? Apart from obviously I understand the culture and everything, but in terms of, how big do you think the firm will be, or will you be expanding in some other ways? What's the vision for the group?
I think the vision that we have is kind of twofold. One is excellence in terms of what we do, and the second is culture.
And I think that is the most important part.
So what we will do is we will grow along those lines. And what I mean by that is, I don't think we have any desire to be a very big firm. by any stretch. We want to remain a specialist firm, but we want to be excellent at what we do. And we will grow in terms of people. I think that's unquestionable. But we want to maintain our standards as we grow. So we want lawyers to join us. We want lawyers to build their practices and their futures within the firm. And we want to create a firm that is not for us, but for them and for a future generation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we'll grow. We may grow geographically. At this stage, I can't say. I'm not sure that we will right now, but you never know what happens. But certainly in terms of numbers, we will grow. And we will probably look to add specialization within these practice areas and grow partners within these practice areas. That is our aim.
Right. So what if you can just throw some light on your thoughts on geographical expansion, like how do you think law firms should consider geographic expansion within India or even outside India? Like what are the key considerations?
That's actually a very good question, given that what we're experiencing just now, which is the work from home model, but I'll let Niloufer answer that.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think I know where Zarir is going. I think that geography is important and localization is important from a client context, and it definitely is important in India. I think having offices outside of India personally is not something I think that's necessarily required. Within India, yeah, I mean, I think there's many firms obviously that have got multiple offices, but the reality is that those offices have to be worthwhile to establish. Either you're doing it because a client wants you to, or because you're actually making an investment in that city. You've seen law firms also expand into other cities in India and close it down because they haven't been able to make it work after 2 to 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is. So, from our perspective, the way we work is that we work with law firms similar to ourselves in other cities where we need their capability. And we've been doing that for a while. And Zarir's been doing that for a much longer time than I have. But, that's the way we would look to work at the current time.
Okay, that's great. What would be some of the things that happened in the last 5 years that you're really proud of with respect to the firm?
What are we really proud of? Well, I think we're proud of what we've been able to achieve in a relatively short space of time. Perhaps it's been about 2.5 years. So I think, I think we're really proud of that. We have been getting up in the rankings. We were fortunate to be ranked by RSGs in the top 35 firms in the country. We were really, really proud of something like that, I think. And I think their rankings go beyond lawyering. So these were some of the proud moments for us. Some of the client reviews and satisfaction feedback that we've had has been really, really, really made us, feel good about what we're doing. The journey is a long road ahead. There's no question about that, but it's really great, and it's really exciting. It's really exciting. That's the thing that keeps me going. There's never a dull day. Great.
Zarir, would you like to add anything about what you think would be some of the highlights for you for the last 5 years?
There have been quite a few. I think it's more really Niloufer because her sectors of focus are institutionalized practices, and clearly ZBA have made quite a mark on within the debt capital market space, within the financing space. My practice areas in terms of dispute resolution has continued to grow, and my aim is that ultimately we try and broaden out the disputes practice to doing general commercial disputes, which we do in any case. I think people have they misunderstand what maritime or shipping law is, because to some extent it is specialized, but it encompasses a large number of branches of commercial law: contract, sale of goods, conflicts of law, insolvency, some aspects of company law. So a lot of procedural law, a lot of evidence when we get into court. So it's interesting, if you open any of the traditional English textbooks on contract law or sale of goods, or in fact conflicts of law, most of the reported judgments are given in a shipping context. So in a sense, our skill sets are fungible, by which I mean that we can very easily and seamlessly transition to doing general commercial disputes, whereas a general disputes man cannot do a shipping dispute.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the mold that we are looking to break out of, and I see insolvency and general corporate and general commercial dispute work as a core focus area for us, and I hope that over the next few years we make inroads into that.
Got it. So when you have been trying to build this firm, what have been some of the major challenges? Of course, the nature of challenges would have evolved over the years. So maybe earlier years you would have faced a different kind of challenges, and now there's always some different challenges to solve in any business. But from your perspective, what have been some of the problems that you resolved in the past, and some things that you are looking forward to work on in the future?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think on a dispute resolution side, our push into banking and financial disputes work requires more effort and time, because once again, that's an institutionalized area of practice. And I think clients take a little bit of time before they get a certain degree of comfort with the expertise that we have in that branch. And I have every confidence that we will get there eventually, because we have the skill sets and the technical capability to execute. It's just a question of being an unfamiliar or less well-known practice. So that's certainly one challenge. I'll let Niloufer elaborate on her area.
So I think to break up your question, I think in terms of some of the challenges that we had and that we've got over, I mean, I think things like, establishing a proper office, establishing IT systems, trying to put in place know-how and know-how systems, making sure that we have an appraisal system from an HR perspective, for team members, trying to give regular feedback, but making sure basically that we have the appraisal and ongoing kind of feedback where we can. So these are some of the things I think that we've been doing over the last couple of years, and that now pretty well established. And to be honest, if you're at a bigger law firm, it's something that's just taken for granted because it's there when you plug and play in. But when you're starting something up, you kind of start from ground level. I think, some of the challenges that we face, and I think a lot of other smaller firms face it, is on the recruitment side. And I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face. And that's why, from our perspective, we want to involve, people who join the firm. We want them to be as involved in the growth of the firm, the strategy of the firm. Any views and ideas we're always open to taking, which we want them to feel a sense of, their own interest, and their own belonging, which it is their own long-term belonging, and they're doing it just as much for their careers as they are for the firm, and they should feel that. And I think that is something that, for a certain type of person, not for everybody, but for a certain type of person, that's something that's interesting. So, we want lawyers who are going to be entrepreneurial, who have a drive to build a practice, to build a business, as well as to learn the law and advise on the law. And I think is one of the challenges that we face in terms of one of your questions. But that's how we're planning to overcome it.
Right. So one of the larger problem that happens is that when you try to hire freshers, people who are just out of college, we discussed also about this briefly. The bigger problem is that sometimes even if they have done well in college, it does not relate to the kind of work they're going to do in a law firm.
Yeah.
And then you have to train them. On the other hand, they have very unrealistic expectations about how well they're going to do as they graduate, right? So you immediately after that. And so how do you manage to train the freshers? And also there's a huge problem that there's a cost of training, and also after that there's a problem of attrition. That this is a problem that that's being faced by almost anybody, even smaller practices, even individual lawyers face this. That when somebody is, if you take somebody under your wings and you train them and then they are going to leave, and it's a big problem, like, in terms of how do you retain and how do you train, and how much time you invest in training in people, and or do you
Yeah.
hire more experienced people? So how do you look at this paradox in your
Well, I think first of all, in terms of recruiting from colleges, I mean, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And there's a couple of points I have on that. First of all, when we recruit people, we ask them to fill in a technical assessment, and we judge them on that technical assessment. And I do that for two reasons. First of all, I believe that it makes somebody focus their thoughts as to actually whether they do want to join this firm, and therefore whether they want to actually put in the time and effort to do the questions. Obviously, we're not necessarily expecting that people will get the perfect answer, but what I want is to at least see that they've made an effort, right? So that's point number one,
Right.
because it shows a certain element, I think, of some form of a diligence. So that's point number one. But to answer your question, yes, it does come across that people may interview in a certain way, and then when they come across and actually start working, really the confidence is probably a little bit more than the actual what they're able to deliver. So yeah, I mean, I think one aspect of that is attitude. I think if people have the willingness to learn, that's a good start. And from our perspective, yes, we do obviously invest time in training, explaining. If somebody comes with a piece of work, you have to say, okay, but have you thought about it from this perspective, that perspective? What did you look at for research? No, you can't Google articles as a source of law. That's not a legal source. All of these kinds of things. You need to review the work. You need to check the documents before they go out to the client. So yes, there is a certain element of the review that has to happen. And, the only way to deal with that really is to hire more senior people, right? Who have had some more work experience, and therefore, and perhaps even been at bigger firms and have left for different reasons, right? Maybe it suits them, maybe it doesn't. I think the image of some of the bigger firms is different from the reality when you get there. Some people like it, some people don't. Everybody's got their different perspectives on things, right? So, for people who've already been there or who've already been in big institutions, and as I said, who have a desire to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial, then we're the firm for them.
Right. If you can explain a little bit more on this, like about the entrepreneurial side of it, as well as how are you different from a big law firm? Like you do pretty much same kind of the work, so I'm expecting you would be having similar hours. And what's really different, and how are you going about building this culture?
So
well, I mean, sorry, go on.
Let me just add two quick comments, and then I'll let Niloufer talk. I think to my mind, the greatest single differentiator is the fact that they are getting hands-on senior partner time from start to finish. And that is a huge advantage, because I think in many of the bigger firms, what tends to happen is, and with no disrespect, I think many of the practitioners there are very accomplished and experienced, but sometimes they tend to sort of, because of the structure of the organization, tend to delegate it downwards, and quality can become patchy in the process. And I think that is the big differentiator in our practice.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, that in a firm, like if you are working not only about ZBA, but even if you're working in other firms where you're directly getting to work with the senior partners with a lot of experience, your learning curve might be a little better than somebody who's not getting that time. That's a very
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Niloufer? Like in terms of the culture of the firm, is it the same like a law firm, like a big law firm, or do you have a different?
No, it's much more relaxed and
I think it's more, we would try and make it more relaxed and informal. I think you'll have to ask our team whether they feel the same way or not. But certainly from our perspective, that's what we try to do. We try to make it as interactive as possible, very informal. Yes, the hours are long. Yes, when you're on deals, the work needs to get done, and there's no kind of getting away from that. But we definitely, I think, try to make it a much more fun and informal environment. That's the aim, and I think that's the difference.
If I
and we totally have an open door policy.
Yeah, I think even big law firms try to make it more fun, but like, how do you actually accomplish it?
Okay, well, for example, I'll tell you one thing. Like I don't know, maybe some firms do it, some firms don't. There's always budget issues, but we want to, we take our team out, and we are not, we actually want to do it quarterly, but it in all honesty, it probably doesn't happen quarterly. But at Christmas, for example, we all went out and, we went to Smash, for example. Smash is like this video games kind of center.
Yeah, of course,
and,
yeah.
we did what did we do? Laser shooting and all that kind of stuff. So, those things I think are quite fun. And I'm not sure necessarily in a bigger law firm that you'd be doing that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying that you should join a law firm just because of that. But I'm just saying that, it's that kind of stuff that we try and do to make things a bit fun. And frankly, we enjoy doing it ourselves anyway. So why not?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you, when we are talking, you said that, also I saw this in several of the articles about ZBA, that you are trying to bring international quality to India and you are trying to run it like an international law firm. And given that both of you have worked in international law firms for very long, what's the difference? Like we have, if we look at other big law firms in Bombay, how are you actually different? And in terms of the client services you do, or any in any other way? And this is something that I thought everybody would like to know.
Well, I think, look, there's much bigger firms than ours in India. And of course, they're probably servicing many, many international clients, and very successfully so. And I think even within the larger law firms, perhaps everybody has their own style and way of working. I think, as I said, one is the culture part. And I think it's not necessarily about the client delivery, because perhaps from the client delivery side, many law firms are quite similar now, and people know what they have to do. And a client in India is going to tell you if he doesn't get what he wants when he wants it. They're very vocal about it often as well, right? So I think perhaps from the client delivery side, it's probably quite similar to what you would have in a big law firm. Timely, properly drafted documents, legal analysis done. I think the difference with us is more internal, and how we're structured internally and how we see ourselves growing internally as well. I think that is perhaps the big difference. So for example, when, we want to take on new partners, when we take on new partners, we expect it to be a democratic process. We expect decision-making to be done democratically by partners, right? That's not necessarily the case in all law firms in India today.
Of course. There's one major area of difficulty that, I have been interviewing a few other founders. A major area of difficulty is actually finding the partners who are of the same wavelength, or actually, can sustain a partnership for very long. And it's obviously a big question. So it's a great thing that, you started a firm within the family, right? But of course, if you have to bring in new partners, it will be a much bigger challenge to make sure that a firm stays together. And this has been a problem with many Indian firms which have broken apart, and a lot of firms which have would have done really well haven't done so well because of partnership splits. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think first of all, approach to what so a couple of aspects that. First of all, what are the person's goals? What are their career goals? And how do they see building something? And does that align with yours? That's the first thing. I think the second thing is having sufficient amount and depth of discussion before somebody joins. And in a way, probably some of the difficult discussions too, right? Because you've also seen situations where people have joined firms and then it's split up in 6 months, 9 months, or whatever. Now, maybe they had those discussions before and maybe they didn't. But I think it's better to have the difficult discussions up front. Third of all, I think, yes, it's, I know that there's a perception of family. But, to be honest, anybody who's worked with Zarir and myself knows that we often have very diametrically opposed views on things. Okay, so we want to encourage healthy debate. We like healthy debate. And we do want to make it genuinely like how an international law firm works. And for people who are coming in, who either we are recruiting and hoping that they become partners, or for people who are lateral partners that we may choose to, decide that maybe they're a good fit. I think, that's the way we would, that's the way we would work it with them.
The one point I would just add to all of that is that a partnership requires, there's a certain discipline that's expected of a partnership, which I think Indians generally haven't been exposed to. It's a new concept that's taking root, and unless there is a proper fit and people's values, skill sets, work ethic align, partnerships can unravel very quickly. So I think one has to take a very cautious and graded approach towards that, because otherwise I think it just, it'd be counterproductive.
Yeah, but I think that's only an issue where somebody's coming in externally as a partner, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's where you are taking a lateral where you haven't worked with them before, for example.
Understood. But another big challenge would be in terms of compensating partners and like a lot of or structuring partnerships for that matter. And how do you look at that problem? Because many firms do struggle with that, to come up with something where, especially when you are looking to expand your partnership and bring in new people. I mean, what are your thought processes around that?
Well, I think it depends on so first of all, I think it depends on whether the partner is coming with a book of business or whether you are agreeing to support them for a period of time, right? Those are two different things. So if you are making an investment in a person and you are bringing them up the curve, then obviously you are making that investment, right? And you have to compensate them. But obviously they will also have to acknowledge that this is a process that's going to take a couple of years to kind of get there. So that's one aspect. I think for people who are coming with a book of business, or at least a little bit of a book of business, or where you're agreeing that you're going to try and build out these practice areas, then you very clearly have to compensate them based on, what they're bringing and kind of what their contribution is to the firm. Now that contribution to the firm can be practice area wise. It could be in terms of building their own practice or being an adjunct to an existing practice. But you will obviously have to contribute directly, I think, compensate them for what they're bringing.
I think the challenge that people are facing while at this stage, when you're bringing new partners in the firm, usually is that how do you ensure that if the person already has business and if they are able to bring in business, then why shouldn't they just do it on their own? So basically here the equation of 1 + 1 has to be more than 2, so that you know. And how does that happen?
No, I'm very clear. There's only so much one can do oneself, right? And that's what I also realize. And you do need to bring in people. You need to bring in people not just from a client perspective, even from your own internal perspective in terms of how you wanted to develop the firm, the growth of the firm, managing the different administrative aspects of the firm, different ideas and ideation on what are the areas. So I think, yes, people who have a book of business could go off and set up their own firm. Of course they can. But the question is that how sustainable is that long term, right? And I think that there is only so much that one can do oneself. And I would even acknowledge that, I think, for us, that's why, we would, if we found the right people or if the right people approached us, we would definitely consider it. Right. Because you have to build that long term, and 2 + 2 doesn't make 4. 2 + 2 can make, 5 type of thing.
Right. And for a partnership to work, it has to be that way, because otherwise
it has to be that way. But it's also, people have to have the maturity enough to be able to deal with a partnership if you're going to have a true partnership, because it also means that you sometimes have to leave your ego at the door,
Right.
Because sometimes, yes, your suggestions or what you want, you will get. Sometimes you won't. But that's the nature of the democratic process, right?
Right. Understood. So, if you look at the current situation in the economic situation, we are probably looking at the worst recession in a long time.
Yeah.
And perhaps there will be a lot of indefinite lockdown. There's no clear way out of lockdown, except that it seems that the government is relaxing some of the economic activities, and probably they'll relax more going forward. As time goes on. In this situation, and we have seen some of the countries has finally started to lift lockdown. Spain has started to lift lockdown, although they are really badly hit by the virus. So how do you see the legal industry working in this? Because obviously it seems like legal sector is a tertiary sector. It doesn't get immediately impacted. It will take a while. But how do you see, of course, Zarir initially mentioned that, there are so many areas where there will be new work that will come up. But beyond that, how do you see the entire sector being impacted?
You mean how do I see the legal sector being impacted?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's going to be maybe, as Zarir said earlier, there's going to be areas of slowdown of work, and there's going to be new work that evolves from this. So there's going to be contract renegotiation. There's going to be more advice probably around data protection as people look to use online in different ways, right? Whatever those
work from home
ways are.
and all that, right?
Yeah, but I think also even in terms of the advisory work now that you're going to be giving clients, I think in a way, although of course this is a very unfortunate global situation, I think it will have forced firms to do work from home, which have never obviously done it before, or where there have been reservations around work from home, because we still do have, I think as a profession, there is still a view of, oh, you have to be present in the office. And particularly, I think as you get more senior, I don't think that that's necessarily kind of required. But I think this has forced people to kind of experiment with that, right? And through it, firms are going to come to their own conclusions in terms of what works for them, what hasn't worked for them, what are some of the technologies that they can use in the future, whether it's, say, video conferencing with a client in, Chandigarh, where they don't need to take a flight anymore. For example, people would have taken flights, now they can maybe just do a video conference, and the client might be more amenable to it now than he would have been a year ago. So I think it's going to change the way we work with clients externally. I think it is going to change the way we think about work from home internally within our organizations, which I think is a very good thing.
Do you feel that this might increase the hiring pool or like even client pools in a way that the physical proximity will matter less? So you would be open to hiring people in a different city or in a smaller city. Do you think these things are going to happen?
So I think it depends on the nature of your practice area. I think for things like litigation, I would imagine that's a bit tougher, right? Maybe for some transactional work that may work. My own personal feeling is that I think it's tough to do that at the junior level, because there is some element of being able to explain and discuss with people that is just that much more easy when it's a physical, right. When you're in the same, showing them the draft, showing them how to make the changes,
you
things
can
like
create
that.
an environment much more easily in an office, within a
yeah.
Within an office.
So I think, but having said that, I think that as people get more senior and as they know what to do, right, then theoretically there should be nothing to stop that. And we've hired people in the past where we, for maternity reasons or for family reasons, they don't want to come into the office, every day, and we've been fine with that. So I think that will definitely is something that people should experiment with now and use it as a tool for working, across different practice areas.
Right.
So I think in a way, they say never waste a good crisis. Yeah. And I think we've made a quantum leap in work from home and the adoption of technology that comes with it. What would have otherwise taken 10 years, right? We've compressed within 3 weeks. We've been forced to, right? Because as they say, invention or adaptation is the mother of necessity. So whether that is how that will impact recruitment is still early to say. I don't mind my gut feeling, and perhaps I'm being old-fashioned here, but my gut feeling is that this is an abnormal situation. I don't think you can have a sustainable business model of permanently doing away with meeting colleagues and clients physically. Mm-hmm. You can, in periods of crisis, perhaps have the technology to ensure that your operations don't get disrupted. You continue to function more or less seamlessly. But ultimately, we are human beings, right? We are by nature, congenial. We want to meet, we want to socialize, we want to have the physical presence.
Yeah.
So,
And now more than ever, because we have been
Correct.
isolated.
Exactly. Ironically, now you value it even more after having experienced 3 weeks of isolation. So I'm not sure. I think technology has its virtues, but it also has its limits. We shouldn't
Right.
get carried away by it.
Of course, of course. How do you feel the business development, for example, by law firms going to be impacted? Because now it has to shift in a way, because we may not have clients willing to meet, or foreign travels not being allowed for the next 1 year, for example. So there must be contingency plans in place. So how do you look at business development going forward? Of course, in many firms, you already have a very strong pipeline. You have the referrals coming in, and you may not actually have to physically meet people or actively do business development. But overall, what has been your experience in that sense?
Well, I think from our side, I think it's moved to the virtual, right? And I just see that trend basically continuing. So I think, obviously the flights probably will be one of the last to come back, I'm assuming. And until then, people will continue to do virtual meetings and presentations. I think that will just continue.
Okay. If you can tell us a bit about how a firm like yours goes about business development generally.
I think nothing very, very novel. I'm sure things that you've heard from many other law firms before. But, it's all the usual stuff, client presentations, sending, updates in law. I think ultimately ours is a people business. People go back to who they trust, and clients have the lawyers they trust, whether it's the big firms, small firms, boutique firms, specialist firms, whatever it might be. And ultimately, I think the best business development you can do is just doing a fabulous job on the current deal that you're doing. That's the best business development, and that's why one of our key areas and one of our key USPs basically is excellence, because that in itself is a form of business development. You don't need to do more then.
Right. That's excellent advice.
So
please.
No, so we don't really, we do a bit of it, but we don't really therefore subscribe to the whole paying for articles and journals and things like that, because from our perspective, we just do it through our work generally. I mean, there are other areas as well, and all the presentations and so forth, but the main is through the delivery of the work product.
Do you have any thoughts on maybe not paid articles, but actually lawyers spending some time on creating articles, videos, or other kind of knowledge dissemination for your clients? Is there anything like that?
You mean in terms of videos?
Yeah, videos or articles or anything, any form of knowledge dissemination.
Sure, of course we do. Yeah, of course we do.
I'm just curious. Of course, it is not necessary that anybody must have, but like you said, the best form is of course the work. But I'm just curious that if you have any of the other.
We do. We regularly write articles. You may have seen some of them on LinkedIn. We post them regularly, or as regularly as we can. So yeah, we definitely write articles. And we haven't done videos yet, but that's not to say that we would be opposed to it in any way. We just haven't done it yet. Right, again, maybe because you just generally go and physically meet people. Maybe over the next year now we'll do a series of videos, and obviously a lot of law firms are doing webinars. We've had some bilateral ones obviously with clients, but nothing as an open kind of series as yet.
Understood. How do you look at training within the firm? Apart from do you have any kind of formal training systems, or have you considered, because obviously training through the work on a per work basis, of course that goes on. But do you feel, or have you ever felt the need to set up training programs, a little more formal programs within your firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think internal training is important. I think it happens in a number of ways. Obviously, one is just working on the deals, which is just their normal course. The second, of course, is, for every article, when we write articles, the teams help out and so forth. And that itself also is a form of learning and development, right? The third is we are very supportive of taking junior lawyers, mid-level lawyers to conferences. I think that's a very good way of learning.
Right.
I think it's an excellent way of them understanding a much broader context than just what is the law saying in this section. Again, going back to the point that it's all about the application, having a broader context. So, unlike many other firms, when we go to conferences, we often, pay for a couple of people to go, even at the junior level, right? Which in some of the bigger firms wouldn't necessarily be the case. But I think that's a really good form of learning and development too for people. And the fourth is obviously a more formalized system of internal training. We do the sessions from time to time, but we probably don't do them as regularly as we.
Got it. Okay. So, there are a few questions. I think I will just I request everybody to send your questions to me directly on my phone if you can, because we are not having the chat activated today. My number is 8377972123. So you can just share your questions on WhatsApp if you like. We'll just quickly take them up. There are a few minutes left. Do we have like a few more minutes, Niloufer, or should we we need to wrap up in like next 5 minutes? Okay, great. So anybody, you have any questions, send it across to me on WhatsApp, or you can send it in our WhatsApp groups as well. You are already part of the WhatsApp groups. You can share your questions there. I'll be happy to take them up. Okay. Okay. So, one problem that people who are starting a law firm often deal with is that, how do we go about the right area of practice? And of course, one way to see is that, what are the areas in which you have developed a substantial expertise already, and go for those. But also it matters that there are a lot of new emerging areas of practice where maybe nobody has many years of experience yet. So do you have any advice for them, like how to go about picking your area of practice, and what could be a strategy for that?
Okay, thanks. I'm off mute now. Yeah, so I think obviously one, as you said, is an area that you are already an expert in. The second is an area that you're passionate about, which may not be something that you've necessarily done work on, but it's something that you're passionate about. So that's another area. I think the third is, new legislations that are coming on, right? People started talking about doing articles, writing about the IBC about a year before it was actually enacted, or maybe 2 years even. So part of it is knowing what legislations are on the anvil and being at the top of that.
Got it. There is Aman Mir who's asking a question about employability in the UK law firms in the near future due to the COVID situation. Do you have anything to say on that?
In terms of employability for somebody from India to go to a UK law firm?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the question.
Okay. Well, I think, sorry, I'm just...
No problem, please. Yeah. No
the UK, quite strong visa issues, right? And I think that used to be a bit of a deterrent for students coming from India, especially after they graduated. It was tough for them to find jobs afterwards. I believe now that's been a bit more relaxed. I think, some of the international law firms do come to the colleges in India to recruit. My piece of advice would be probably the best way is to do an internship in one of those firms, because most firms, and even firms like ourselves, we try to recruit, if it's at the graduate level, through internships. And most law firms will you basically have that opportunity then to impress. Now, how your work actually pans out and whether there's a job for you at the end of that, depends on a luck, what kind of work you do, etc. But basically it's through, an internship process, that would probably be one of the best ways, I would have thought.
That would be the best. Okay. There is a question on, there are a lot of skills that, admittedly law schools do not teach, But what can I do? This is a question from Hamza, that what can I do so that when I join a law firm from day one, I am very productive and a useful resource?
I think knowing your research skills. Because a lot of the research, somebody will be asked something and they go off and you say, okay, can you please find me the law on this, or can you find me a case on this? And it definitely makes a big difference for if somebody responds saying, yes, I found these 3 cases, this said A, that said B, the last Supreme Court case said C, and they do you a nice summary, versus somebody who said, oh, I can't really find something. And then you have to ask them, then, okay, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that, etc. So I think your research capability is one way that you can definitely impress at the junior level. Was that the question?
So that is one of the skills. But are there other skills like drafting, negotiation? If they can learn somehow, so would that be useful? I think that's what you're thinking.
Yes, but I don't know how those skills are available outside of university. Okay, I mean, other than just starting to work and learning it on the job.
They can learn it from somewhere, from anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, if there's
they might be able to
courses,
learn it from a family member or senior.
Family member, or if there's online courses that they
Long
can join, that's always
maybe.
Great. Online, how do you, take a document and try and find, the 10 mistakes, and then they give you the answer on a sheet, and then the person can compare to understand, and then they can do some practices on that basis. Those kinds of things are quite helpful for drafting. I think negotiation, again, you can do a kind of Q&A on the negotiation side. But again, something like that on an interactive course might be helpful.
Right. I think very long internships definitely help. So if you are interning somewhere for 6 months, 1 year, it might be.
Yeah. Because that's where you really get exposed.
Right.
You get exposed to client conference calls. You get exposed to drafting, to negotiation. You also are able to see, maybe not always litigation, but certainly most transactions, at least you should be able to see one from start to finish. So you get to understand the entire life cycle of how something works. So that's also helpful. And sometimes, I got a message from somebody who had interned with us the other day, and sometimes the area of laws you think you will like, you don't like when it comes to the practical side of things. And vice versa. Something that you thought you didn't like, actually you've had a little bit of awakening, and you're like, hey, that's actually quite interesting.
Yeah, because I have seen a lot of people saying, I like capital markets, and then they go into a law firm, and in 6 months they're like, I'm done, I can't do this
exactly
anymore.
So
same thing happens to IP. People really like IP law in college, and then they actually go into an IP law firm and then say, this is not what I want to do.
Yeah. So, that's why doing different types of internships is also very important.
Right.
So that you can understand through that process whether this is something that you want in terms of a job. And that's why, from our perspective, the other thing that we do, of course, we are a smaller firm, so it's easier for us to do it. But even the bigger firms do it because they have rotations, is that it's important, I think, even when people are joining, to do different types of work. So that's also something that we try to encourage. So somebody does an M&A deal, they do a banking deal, they do a litigation, they do an employment piece of work, an IP piece of work. That also gives people a little context for the different areas. And through that process, they get a feel for what they like.
So what we do in LawSikho is that we, like our students, we encourage them to work with SMEs and startups that have no legal representation otherwise. And when they get to work with these people, they get to draft contracts. Otherwise, basically, there are people who are downloading from the internet and like using it. And if there's even a law student willing to look at it and give them advice or, do something on it, they're pretty open to you adding value there. Similarly, if they are not being able to recover some amount of money, it's a small amount of money, they're not going to a lawyer, they might be willing to, let you try your hands on it. So those are the kind of opportunities we encourage our students to go after. And
that's actually great. And that brings me to another thought that I had in my mind that I didn't mention, is that we try and do at least 4 or 5 pieces of work for NGOs every year.
Right.
And that's another way that, students could also look to, sharpen some of their skills and put it to actual practical use. Is to do work for an NGO. So it could be getting contributions into the NGO. It could be helping them with some standard form agreement or some, website disclaimer or something like that, whatever it might be.
Right. There's a question from Sumit Kansal. He's asking, we are a relatively newer law firm, almost 3 years into commercial and corporate and commercial litigation practice. Is specific sectoral industry knowledge a right idea at this point, or all general industries commercial litigation should be undertaken, especially in view of COVID? So he's asking if he should, target a specific sector in his practice, or should he like go after everything? What would be better?
Difficult to say. Difficult to say. I think that one. It depends also where he's located, which city he's in, for example, right? Like a lot of your tri-related litigation would be in Delhi and things. So it just depends on what area. But I think it's an individual choice. Either some people might take a sector-based approach, some people might take a practice-based approach. I don't think I think it's tough for one person to have a knowledge of all sectors.
Right. Do you feel that if somebody is in a smaller sector initially, they can quickly kind of, if they're doing good work, the word spreads faster in a smaller sector if you're focusing on it rather than going for many different things?
Pardon me?
Do you feel that if somebody, when they're just starting out, they focus on a narrow sector, it kind of helps them to at least get a name spread within that sector rather than going wide in many different sectors?
I think it does, but there has to be work that people are willing to give law firms in that sector. Right. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging to run a practice if you are not able to generate cash flow, right? Ultimately. Right. So if you're in an area where people are not wanting to use the services of a law firm,
of course,
then that's going to be challenging. But obviously, if they're willing to use the services of a law firm, or if you see the potential for it, then it sounds like a great area.
Then it sounds good. Okay. There's a question from Haindavi from Vizag on how do we structure client presentation, the critical aspects of client presentation. This is interesting.
I think you could probably do a session on that, couldn't you, Ramanuj?
Sure. If you're willing, I'll invite you back to do a session.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one key thing I would just say on that is try and make it as logical as possible in terms of the flow of the presentation.
Okay.
Whatever your subject matter might be, hopefully that's enough of a start for the relevant person who asked.
Yeah, so I have received at least another 30-40 questions, but we'll not be able to take all of them. Maybe I can share some of these over an email to Niloufer, and if she's willing, she can respond to some of these later.
It'll keep me busy over the weekend.
Okay, so or maybe they can connect with you on LinkedIn, and that may be an option.
No, I'm not very good on LinkedIn. I hardly check it. So
okay.
I check it, but if you want, perhaps you could send me an email. Happy to try and put something together.
Great. So I think we would definitely love to have you back another time and share some more insights. Thank you so much for taking out time today, and thank you everybody whoever joined the session today, and thank you for being a part of it. And
no, thank you very much for having us. It was good fun. We enjoyed it, and hopefully spark lots of debate in terms of people's reactions and views. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.